A simple elderly woman was told to sing at a talent show as a joke, then brought the house down. Margaret Wilson had lived in the same modest apartment in Springfield, Missouri, for over 30 years. At 78, she was a fixture in her neighborhood. The kind woman who watered plants for vacationing neighbors and always remembered birthdays with handmade cards. Her husband Robert had passed away 5 years ago, leaving her with quiet days filled with crossword puzzles, afternoon walks, and weekly calls from her son in California. The community center where Margaret volunteered twice a week was buzzing with excitement about the upcoming Springfield's Got Talent show. For 10 years, the annual event had raised funds for local charities while showcasing local performers, mostly enthusiastic amateurs with varying degrees of talent. "We need more contestants," announced Diane Lawson, the center's director, during a planning meeting. Margaret sat in the back corner, folding pamphlets for an upcoming health fair. "What about Margaret?" The suggestion came from Jason Miller, a 26-year-old volunteer coordinator with gelled hair and a perpetual smirk. "She's always humming old songs." A few snickers rippled through the younger volunteers. Margaret pretended not to hear, though her cheeks flushed as she continued folding. "Perfect!" Diane clapped her hands. "Margaret, you'd be wonderful. We need more diverse age representation anyway." "Oh, I couldn't possibly," Margaret murmured. But Diane was already moving on to other matters. After the meeting, Jason approached with a clipboard. "So, what'll you sing, Mrs. W? Over the Rainbow? Something from The Sound of Music?" His tone carried barely concealed mockery. "I haven't decided to participate," Margaret replied carefully. "Come on, it's for charity. Everyone loves a good sport." He winked at Kayla, another young volunteer. "Plus, the seniors will love seeing one of their own up there." "I'll consider it," Margaret said diplomatically, gathering her purse. At home that evening, Margaret made her usual cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window overlooking the street. The truth was, she did love to sing. In her youth, before meeting Robert, she had performed in church and school choirs. There had even been a brief period when she'd sung with a small jazz group at local venues, but that was over 50 years ago, another lifetime. In the hallway closet, behind winter coats and old photo albums, sat a dusty record player and a collection of vinyl records. On impulse, Margaret retrieved a Billie Holiday album, carefully placed the needle, and let the rich sounds fill her apartment. As Holiday's voice crooned, "God bless the child," Margaret closed her eyes and softly joined in. The notes came naturally, as if no time had passed. When Robert was alive, she would sometimes sing for him on quiet evenings like this. He always said her voice reminded him of warm honey. The phone's shrill ring interrupted her reverie. It was Diane, enthusiastically confirming that Margaret was registered for the talent show. "Jason said you agreed. This is wonderful. You're contestant number 12. The show's in 3 weeks." Margaret opened her mouth to correct the misunderstanding, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was the memory of singing with Robert, or maybe just the indignation of being the butt of a young man's joke. "What time should I arrive?" she asked instead. Word spread quickly about Margaret's participation in the talent show. She noticed the sidelong glances and poorly hidden smiles when she arrived for her volunteer shift the following week. "Heard you're gonna rock the house, Mrs. Wilson," said one teenager who came to the center for tutoring. His friends giggled behind him. "We'll see," Margaret replied simply, maintaining her dignity. At home, Margaret began tentatively practicing. At first, she sang quietly, conscious of her neighbors. But as days passed, her confidence grew. She'd chosen "At Last" by Etta James, a song that had special meaning. It was playing the night Robert had proposed to her in 1965, at a restaurant with a small dance floor and a jukebox in the corner. Margaret's son Michael called during her practice one afternoon. "Mom, what's this I hear about you performing in a talent show?" His voice carried a note of concern. "News travels fast," Margaret remarked, "even to California. Mrs. Hendricks from your building called me. She's worried you're being taken advantage of." Margaret sighed. I'm not senile, Michael. I know exactly what I'm doing. But from what she said, some young people at the center put you up to this as a joke. Yes, I'm aware. Margaret's voice was firm. And that's precisely why I'm doing it. After convincing her protective son that she was making her own choice, Margaret returned to practicing. Her voice, though not as strong as in her youth, carried a richness that only experience could bring. On her third day of practice, Mrs. Hendricks from apartment 3B knocked on her door. "I thought someone had left a radio on," the neighbor said, eyes wide. "That was you singing." Margaret nodded, slightly embarrassed. "Well, don't stop on my account. It's beautiful." Mrs. Hendricks left with an encouraging smile. 2 weeks before the show, Margaret visited Goodwill and found a simple but elegant navy dress that complemented her silver hair. She also called her old friend Gloria, who had been a professional hairstylist before retirement. "I want something different. Not dramatic, but not my usual self," Margaret explained during their lunch date. "How about we bring back some of your natural waves?" Gloria suggested. "And maybe a touch of color on your cheeks and lips. Nothing garish." As the talent show approached, Margaret faced moments of doubt. One evening, after a practice session where her voice had cracked on the high notes, she nearly called Diane to withdraw. Instead, she made tea, took a breath, and called the one person who might understand. "Carol, it's Margaret Wilson." Carol had been in the same jazz group as Margaret in their youth. Though they rarely spoke now, they exchanged Christmas cards each year. Maggie Wilson. What a surprise! After explaining the situation, Margaret asked hesitantly, "Am I being foolish?" Carol laughed warmly. "Foolish? You're being marvelous. Those kids think they're having a laugh at your expense, but you're getting the last laugh. Plus, honey, you could always sing circles around half the professionals I knew. That was a long time ago. Some things don't fade, Maggie. Talent is one of them." The morning of the talent show arrived with unseasonably cool weather for May. Margaret woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves. She had barely slept, and the faces of the young volunteers kept appearing in her dreams, pointing and laughing. "This is ridiculous," she told her reflection as she sipped her morning coffee. "You're 78 years old. Why do you care what some 20-somethings think?" But she did care. Not about their approval, exactly, but about proving something to them, to herself, to the memory of the young woman who had once dreamed of singing professionally before life took her in other directions. Around noon, Gloria arrived to help with hair and makeup. As promised, she kept it simple but effective, enhancing Margaret's natural beauty, rather than trying to create something that wasn't there. "You look stunning," Gloria declared when finished. "Robert would have been so proud." Margaret swallowed the lump in her throat. "I think he would have thought I was crazy." "That too," Gloria laughed, "but proud all the same." The Springfield Community Center had been transformed for the event. Folding chairs faced a small stage decorated with twinkling lights and a banner declaring, "Springfield's Got Talent." A surprising number of people milled about, far more than Margaret had expected. Backstage, really just the community center's multi-purpose room, contestants prepared nervously. There was a teenage dance troupe practicing their routine in one corner, a middle-aged man tuning a guitar, and several other performers of various ages. Margaret was by far the oldest contestant. Jason spotted her as she signed in. His eyes widened slightly at her transformed appearance. "Mrs. Wilson, you really came." He seemed uncertain now, his usual confidence wavering. "I said I would," Margaret replied evenly. "Right. Well, you're on second to last, before the Henderson twins' magic act." He shuffled his clipboard awkwardly. "Good luck." Margaret found a quiet corner to wait. The small TV showing the stage performances did nothing to calm her nerves. Some acts were genuinely talented. A young woman playing violin, a surprisingly good barbershop quartet of local businessmen. Others were less polished, but enthusiastic. As her time approached, Margaret's hands began to tremble. A stagehand gave her a 5-minute warning, and she slipped into the bathroom to collect herself. Looking in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. Gloria had swept her silver hair into an elegant style that softened her features. The navy dress, simple but classic, gave her a timeless elegance. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. The teenager who had teased her at the center was exiting the stage after a skateboard trick routine when Margaret took her position in the wings. The audience applauded politely as Diane stepped up to the microphone. Our next performer is someone many of you know from her years of service to our community. Please welcome, in her talent show debut, Mrs. Margaret Wilson. The applause was scattered and uncertain. As Margaret walked carefully to center stage, she could feel the audience's mild confusion and the unspoken question. What could this elderly woman possibly do to entertain them? The microphone stood before her, intimidating despite its small size. Margaret adjusted it slightly, her hands still trembling. In the front row, she spotted Jason and several other young volunteers, watching with expressions ranging from amusement to embarrassment. The music began, the familiar introduction to "At Last." Margaret took a deep breath and closed her eyes briefly, summoning not just her voice, but the memory of who she had been and still was beneath the years. The first notes left Margaret's lips tentatively, almost inaudibly. A few people in the audience exchanged glances, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. In the front row, Jason's smirk was firmly in place, though a hint of discomfort had crept into his expression. But by the second line, something changed. Margaret's voice found its strength, resonating throughout the community center with surprising power and warmth. The rich, smoky quality of her tone, honed by decades of life experience, gave the familiar lyrics a depth that recordings by younger singers often lacked. The audience's reaction transformed in real time. Expressions of mild embarrassment and pity gave way to surprise, then rapt attention. When Margaret hit the chorus, her voice soaring with the emotional "At Last," a woman in the third row actually gasped. Margaret was no longer in the community center. She was 23 again, singing in a small jazz club where Robert had first heard her perform. She was 35, humming this very song while dancing with him in their kitchen as their son slept upstairs. She was 65, singing softly to Robert in the hospital during his first heart scare, promising that they still had time. As the song built to its climax, Margaret opened her eyes to see Jason's face, his smirk completely gone, replaced by genuine astonishment. The other young volunteers beside him looked equally stunned. When the final note faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Margaret's heart sank briefly. Had she misjudged her performance? Then someone in the back stood and began to applaud. Like a wave, others followed until the entire audience was on their feet. The applause continued far longer than it had for any previous act. Someone whistled sharply. A man shouted, "Encore!" Margaret stood there, overwhelmed, tears threatening to spill despite her resolve to maintain composure. Diane rushed onto the stage, her own eyes glistening. "Margaret Wilson! Everyone! Who knew we had a professional in our midst all these years?" As Margaret made her way backstage, contestants who hadn't yet performed looked at her with new respect and, in some cases, trepidation at having to follow her act. The teenage dancers who had largely ignored her earlier now stared wide-eyed. "Mrs. Wilson, that was amazing," one of them said. "Thank you, dear," Margaret replied, her voice slightly hoarse from the performance. The Henderson twins, scheduled to perform after her, looked terrified. The boys, perhaps 12 years old, clutched their magic props nervously. "You'll be wonderful," Margaret assured them, squeezing the nearest twin's shoulder gently. She found a chair and sat down, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the performance was fading, leaving her drained but exhilarated. Her phone buzzed with a text from Gloria. "You brought down the house!" The remainder of the show passed in a blur. The magic act went reasonably well, though the audience was still clearly buzzing about Margaret's performance. When all contestants returned to the stage for the award announcements, Margaret was surprised to find herself being subtly repositioned toward the center by the other performers. The Before announcing our winners, selected by our panel of judges, Diane said, we have a special recognition, the Audience Favorite Award, determined by applause. The audience began clapping before she could finish, many looking directly at Margaret. Goes to our own Margaret Wilson. The applause was thunderous. Someone had hastily created a special certificate, which Diane presented along with a small bouquet of flowers. The other contestants clapped enthusiastically, even those who went on to win the judges' first, second, and third place awards. As the event ended and audience members began approaching her, Margaret searched the crowd for one face in particular. She found Jason standing awkwardly near the refreshment table, looking unsure of himself. "Mrs. Wilson," he began when she approached him. That was..." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Margaret regarded him thoughtfully. "For what, exactly?" "For suggesting you as a joke. For thinking..." He trailed off, genuinely embarrassed now, "that an old woman couldn't possibly have talent," Margaret suggested, not unkindly. Jason nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Apology accepted," Margaret said. "On one condition, anything. Remember that people, all people, have depths you can't see and stories you don't know, even the ones who seem unremarkable." By Monday morning, Margaret's performance had become the talk of Springfield. Her neighbor, Mrs. Hendricks, reported that her phone had been ringing non-stop with friends who had attended the show or heard about it secondhand. "You've gone viral, Margaret," Mrs. Hendricks declared. "I'm not sure what that means, but it sounds unpleasant," Margaret replied, making her neighbor laugh. What it meant, as Margaret soon discovered, was that someone had recorded her performance on a smartphone and uploaded it to YouTube. By Monday afternoon, the video had accumulated over 50,000 views and was climbing rapidly. Comments poured in from around the country, many expressing surprise and delight at discovering such talent in an unexpected performer. The local newspaper called requesting an interview. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica, arrived at Margaret's apartment with a photographer in tow. "I have to ask," Jessica said after preliminary questions, "how did it feel to prove everyone wrong? To see the looks on their faces when they realized they'd underestimated you?" Margaret considered the question carefully. "Satisfying, I suppose. But that wasn't why I did it." "No. Then why?" "I did it because for 50 years, I set aside something I loved, something that was fundamentally part of who I am. When these young people suggested me as a joke, I realized I had a choice. I could be hurt, or I could reclaim that part of myself." The resulting article, published the next day under the headline, "Springfield's Hidden Star Shines at 78, was surprisingly thoughtful. Jessica had captured not just the events, but the emotional journey behind them. Margaret's phone rang more in the next week than it had in the previous year. Old friends from church called to congratulate her. Her son Michael flew in from California for the weekend, bringing his wife and teenage daughter. "I've been showing the video to everyone at work," Michael told her over dinner at the local steakhouse. "My boss says you sing better than his favorite jazz vocalist. It's one song." "Michael, let's not get carried away." His teenage daughter, Sophie, looked up from her phone. "Grandma, you have over 200,000 views now. That's seriously impressive." The following Tuesday, Margaret returned to her volunteer shift at the community center for the first time since the show. She'd expected some attention, but wasn't prepared for the reception she received. Seniors from the morning exercise class broke into applause when she entered. Children from the after-school program asked for her autograph. Diane pulled her aside, eyes bright with excitement. "Margaret, you won't believe the calls I've been getting. The mayor wants you to sing at the 4th of July celebration. The Springfield Orchestra asked if you'd consider being a guest performer for their summer series." "That's ridiculous," Margaret protested. "I'm not a professional." "Tell that to the 200,000 people who've watched your performance online." A familiar voice spoke from behind them. "Mrs. Wilson." It was Jason, looking more humble than Margaret had ever seen him. "Do you have a minute?" Diane excused herself with a knowing smile, leaving them alone. "I wanted to thank you," Jason said quietly. "What you said to me after the show, It made me think about how I treat people, especially the seniors here. Margaret nodded, waiting for him to continue. I've been volunteering here because it looks good on graduate school applications, he admitted. But after seeing you perform, after realizing how wrong I was, I've been talking with some of the other seniors. Really talking to them. He hesitated. Mr. Grayson used to be a NASCAR mechanic. Mrs. Abernathy worked on the Manhattan Project. I had no idea. People contain multitudes, Margaret said simply. Anyway, I had an idea. With your permission, I'd like to start a project. Interviews with seniors about their lives, their hidden talents, the things they've done that younger people might not expect. We could create videos, maybe a podcast. For the first time, Margaret saw Jason not as an arrogant young man, but as someone with potential for growth. I think that's a wonderful idea. His face lit up. Really? Would you be my first interview? On one condition, Margaret said, suppressing a smile. You have to promise not to make it go viral. Summer arrived in Springfield with unusual gentleness. Warm days without the typical Missouri humidity. Evenings cool enough for porch sitting. Margaret found herself accepting a few of the performance invitations that continued to arrive, though she declined most. She sang at the Senior Center's anniversary celebration and at a charity event for the local children's hospital, but refused offers that felt too commercial or exploitative. The 4th of July performance with the Springfield Symphony Orchestra proved impossible to decline, however. The mayor personally called to invite her to a feast, and the event raised funds for music education in public schools, a cause Margaret deeply supported. The evening of July 4th found Margaret in a modest dressing room behind the outdoor stage at the city park. Through the window, she could see thousands of Springfield residents spread across the lawn with picnic blankets and folding chairs, waiting for the music and fireworks. A soft knock at the door revealed Gloria, carrying a small jewelry box. I thought you might want to wear these, Gloria said, opening the box to reveal a pair of pearl earrings. Seat. They were Robert's anniversary gift to you that last year, weren't they? Margaret nodded, touched by her friend's thoughtfulness. He'd think this was all so silly, she said, gesturing to the dressing room, the concert program with her name listed as special guest performer. He'd be proud, Gloria corrected, helping Margaret fasten the earrings. Just like Michael and Sophie are, just like I am. Backstage was a flurry of activity. Orchestra members tuning instruments, the conductor reviewing last-minute changes, stage managers with headsets directing traffic. Margaret felt oddly calm amidst the chaos, far more at ease than she had been before the talent show 2 months earlier. The orchestra's first set received enthusiastic applause from the crowd. Then the conductor, a dignified woman in her 50s, stepped to the microphone. Sastit, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to introduce a Springfield treasure who recently reminded us all not to judge a book by its cover. Please welcome Margaret Wilson. The applause was immediate and warm. As Margaret took her place beside the conductor, she scanned the front rows where Michael, his family, and Gloria sat beaming. Beside them, somewhat surprisingly, was Jason with a video camera on a small tripod. He gave her an encouraging thumbs up. The orchestra began the introduction to Over the Rainbow, Margaret's selection for this performance. Unlike the talent show, there were no nervous jitters this time, no moment of uncertainty. She began to sing with confidence, her voice carrying effortlessly across the park. As the song progressed, Margaret noticed something remarkable. People of all ages were watching with rapt attention. Children sitting still on their blankets, teenagers who had set aside their phones, elderly couples holding hands. For these few minutes, she was bridging generations. After the performance and encore, Margaret made her way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and kind words from strangers. A young girl, perhaps 9 or 10, approached shyly with her mother. Mrs. Wilson, I saw your video, and I started taking singing lessons, the girl said quietly. My teacher says I shouldn't wait until I'm older to do what I love. Later that evening, as fireworks exploded overhead in bursts of color and sound, Margaret sat with her family and friends on their picnic blanket. "I have news," Jason said during a lull in the display. The Senior Stories project has been picked up by the PBS affiliate in Kansas City. They're going to turn it into a regular segment for their Community Spotlight program. "That's wonderful," Margaret said sincerely. "How many have you interviewed so far?" 15. "Every story is amazing." He hesitated. "And I've been accepted to graduate school for journalism. I'm focusing on human interest stories and oral histories." "I'm proud of you," Margaret told him, meaning it. As the grand finale of fireworks lit up the sky, Margaret reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. What had begun as a cruel joke had somehow blossomed into this: new friendships, rediscovered passions, unexpected influence. She thought of all the years she'd spent defining herself as Robert's wife, Michael's mother, a community volunteer, all roles she cherished. But somehow, she had forgotten to also be Margaret, the woman who loved to sing. It had taken a thoughtless prank to remind her of that essential truth. Tomorrow, she would begin voice lessons with a retired music professor from the local college, not to become a professional at 78, but simply to honor the gift she'd been given. Next week, she would help Jason interview Mr. Abernathy about his poetry. Written secretly over decades while he worked as a postal carrier, the final bursts of color faded from the sky, leaving only smoke and the memory of brilliance. Around her, people began packing up blankets and collecting children. Life would move forward, as it always did, but Margaret Wilson would move with it differently now, singing as she went.